Power is a dangerous inheritance. It can shape dynasties or destroy them. And in the history of Korea's Joseon dynasty, no name is spoken with such fear and such venom as Yeonsangun, a boy scarred by the violent death of his mother, a king who silenced scholars, destroyed culture, and unleashed terror on his own people. Some call him a tyrant, others a victim of trauma, but all agree his rule marked one of the darkest chapters in Joseon history. Tonight, on Court of the Crane, we open the case of Yeonsangun, Korea's Mad King. We will examine his crimes, his atrocities, and the shadows of his mind, and ask, what happens when trauma and unchecked power collide? Yi Young, later Yeonsangun, was born in 1476, son of King Seongjong and Queen Yoon. Queen Yoon was volatile, jealous, and, modern scholars suspect, struggled with postpartum bipolar disorder. Records say she once poisoned a concubine, then scratched the king's face in rage. Ministers saw danger. In 1482, she was deposed and forced to die by poison, leaving her 6-year-old son orphaned. Imagine growing up with whispers that your mother was both a murderer and a victim, and learning later that her death was by royal decree. The trauma of Queen Yoon's death would shadow Yeonsangun through childhood and adolescence. By the time he ascended the throne, it had already begun shaping his approach to power. In 1494, at 18, Yi Young took the crown as Yeonsangun. At first, he seemed capable, listening to ministers, easing peasant burdens, and enacting modest reforms. For a brief moment, Joseon had hoped that this young king might continue the prosperity of his father, King Seongjong. But trauma leaves a mark, and calm does not last forever. Only 4 years later, the kingdom was engulfed in fear. This was 1498, the year of the First Literati Purge. A single scholar, Kim Il-sung, dared to compile historical records that cast Yeonsangun's grandfather, King Sejo, in a critical light. To Yeonsangun, this was not history, it was hearsay. His response was swift and merciless. Dozens of scholars, loyal Confucian officials who had served the dynasty with integrity, were executed. Others were exiled, stripped of their titles, or reduced to ruin. Some, already long dead, were dragged from their graves and mutilated in grotesque posthumous punishments. Families of the accused were destroyed by association. Entire lineages tainted because a son, a father, or a grandfather had dared to write. It was a purge not only of men, but of memory. This was more than political retribution. It was the opening act in Yeonsangun's war against words themselves. The king's paranoia spread beyond the scholar's pen to the language of the people. Satirical leaflets, called tuso, began to appear, written not in Chinese, the classical script of the elite, but in Hangul, the simple phonetic alphabet created by King Sejong just decades earlier. These anonymous writings mocked the king. They whispered truths in alleys, joked about his excesses, and questioned his morality. To Yeonsangun, they were daggers made out of ink. His answer was brutal. He banned the use of Hangul outright. Books written in Hangul were burned. Commoners were forbidden to use it, and those caught with writings in the alphabet faced harsh punishment. The people were even ordered to spy on their neighbors for any illicit notes, under threat of death. And so, to the king, words became crimes. To write was rebellion. To read was treason. To remember was dangerous. This was no longer governance, it was erasure. In silencing language, Yeonsangun silenced identity itself. Hangul had given a voice to the common people, farmers, women, the poor, those who had never before been able to record their own lives. By banning it, Yeonsangun sought to strangle the soul of the nation. What began as a political purge in 1498 had now metastasized into something deeper. A king consumed by fear, waging war on memory, on speech, on the very idea that truth could outlive him. The purges stripped the kingdom of scholars and silenced dissent. But Yeonsangun's paranoia did not stop at letters and records. It seeped into the halls of the palace, turning institutions meant for learning and care into instruments of personal pleasure and coercion. What started as political suppression now touched every corner of courtly life. As Yeonsangun's paranoia deepened, his tastes grew twisted and predatory. The halls of authority, once bastions of learning and ritual, crumbled beneath his whims. He dismantled Joseon's highest educational institution and turned it into a place of debauchery and theatrical indulgence. At the same time, temples and scholarly halls were transformed into pleasure grounds, repurposed for his personal enjoyment. But the true breadth of his tyranny lay in the human cost. Thousands of Wenyeo women trained for medical service were forcibly drafted into the palace. These women were coerced into entertainment, concubinage, and sexual performance, stripped of any agency. Families were torn apart, social hierarchies violated, and trust obliterated. The seizure went further. Thousands of young girls from across the kingdom were rounded up, relocated to serve, entertain, and subject to the king's whims. Societal structures shattered in an orgy of exploitation. Cultural destruction followed. Hangul, the script that gave voice to the common people, became a symbol of rebellion. In the name of pleasure, Yeonsangun obliterated learning, violated every institution meant to elevate society, and weaponized both language and bodies. This was not entertainment, it was terror. From a modern trauma-informed lens, this moves beyond despotism into systemic abuse. State power used to commodify bodies and erase identity. Echoes of human trafficking, institutional gender violence, and enforced silence resonate across centuries. The breaking point came in 1504. He learned his mother was murdered by court decree, not fate. A blood-stained cloth was shown, evidence of her final agony. This was not justice, it was vengeance. He beat 2 concubines to death, the ones implicated in Queen Yoon's downfall. He pushed his own grandmother, Grand Queen Dowager Insu, to death. He desecrated graves, had Han Myung-hwa's tomb opened and his head severed. Then, the Second Literati Purge. Ministers labeled guilty by inaction were executed. Families were punished. 8 dead officials had their remains mutilated. At least 36 executed, many more exiled, dismissed, or enslaved. In Yeonsangun's Joseon, the past was treason, and truth a death sentence. Trauma metastasized into tyranny. A king broken by grief became a beast. Truth finally revealed, but with blood, not healing. By 1506, even the palace could not stand his terror. A coup ended his reign. He was exiled and died soon after, alone and disgraced. His favorite concubine was beheaded. His 4 sons forced into suicide. His line was erased. Joseon had survived his reign, but at what cost? The wounds he inflicted on culture, scholarship, and society would take generations to heal. Yeonsangun's vengeance is not just history, it is a mirror. How often do we see leaders today, wounded by personal insecurities, blinded by paranoia, lashing out at perceived enemies? How often does unresolved trauma, left unchecked, echo outward into violence, corruption, or oppression? Yeonsangun's rise was shaped by trauma, and his fall by vengeance. His reign wasn't history, it was a warning. When grief becomes law and paranoia reigns supreme, institutions crumble. We still see it today, through censorship, purges, rewriting history. Unhealed trauma doesn't vanish. In power, it can devastate nations. We cannot separate the personal from the political. And so, let his story be a call to action. When abuse hides in silence, expose it. When trauma shames us into muteness, speak. Let us hold power to account, protect the vulnerable, and speak, even when voices are silenced. This has been Court of the Crane. If this has moved you, subscribe and share, and stand witness. Because in history's court, silence is never neutral, and the verdict is ours to write.